2025 for gaming for me has been okay. I definitely got a lot of hours in, but it really was in a very, very, very small handful of titles, and then not that many other games outside of it. And I think I just kind of have to accept the fact that I kind of play this way, that I play a lot of a very specific game and then not as much as others, just with the way that I do the YouTube channel and my gaming interests align and stuff. But I want to keep making these end of year gaming recap videos a tradition, and so I want to have a vehicle to be able to talk about games that I normally wouldn't do like full entire dedicated videos on. So here we are. Also, I guess it works out if I don't play that many other games, that means less work I have to do for this video. So funny coincidence there. So let's talk about major gaming stuff that has happened for me in the year of 2025. Games I've completed, major additions to the repertoire, things like that, maybe change in preferences. One of the big things that I did this year was I got a new GPU for my PC, my 9070 XT. I already made an entire video earlier this year talking about my GPU and doing some testing and stuff, so if you're interested in that, go watch that video. Not only does it perform so much better than the 1600 XT, allowing me to get closer to my LG CX's 4K 120 maximum resolution refresh rate combo, which is just a treat to experience. I also get a teensy little bit of a boost in video rendering, but I mean, it's not like a super duper huge amount. Like, it's not like totally changing the game, but I definitely notice a speed up. The other big piece of hardware that I got in the past year was this, the DualSense Edge. So the actual story of me acquiring this controller is a little bit interesting. Do you guys remember the PlayStation 30th anniversary thing that happened in 2024? Like, them selling like PlayStation 1 themed PS5s and accessories to go with it. Well, they had a 30th anniversary DualSense Edge that was not that much more expensive than the regular Edge. And so I thought to myself, it's a cool looking color. It's really the only way I could justify to myself I would spend that much on a controller. And so I tried to buy it, but you know how these things are. It sold out virtually instantly and stuff. By the time I got there, there wasn't anything I was interested in buying and stuff. And so I ended up talking to somebody that I knew about this kind of whole experience about, man, I wish I could have got this controller. It looks so cool, blah, 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 blah. And they ended up getting me this, just the regular DualSense Edge controller for Christmas. So, I want to shout out that person for being really thoughtful and getting this gift for me. The actual feel of the controller feels so much more different than the regular DualSense. It feels like the DualSense is just like a toy in comparison to this. And so since I've gotten this controller, this has become my daily driver for gaming. I use this thing all the time across titles on PC, PS5. I can't use it on Switch, obviously. The paddles feel really good. The trigger stops make so many games feel so much better because I can just have a simple button click. Oh, fantastic for JRPGs. So is it worth it to buy a DualSense Edge, whether to pair with your PS5 or just as like a controller to use on your PC? No, absolutely not, no. If it wasn't for the specific circumstances I outlined earlier, I would not go out of my way to buy this controller. I find that the actual price relative to the value of things that you're getting is incredibly poor. There are much better options that you can go with. This is a pretty cool controller though. It does fix like whatever nagging little issues that I had left with the regular DualSense. Like that weird feeling that I didn't entirely hold onto the controller. Like the rounded bottom fixes that. And hey, speaking of topics I've already previously made video on, I'm gonna kind of fast forward through 2 games I've already made dedicated videos on. Firstly, we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth because the PC release came out this year. So play the game on normal, play the game on hard. I did all the side quests again. I get a bunch of footage out of that game. So it is by far my most played title in 2025. But I've talked enough about this game in other videos. You don't need to hear more about it here. And then the other game I did a dedicated video on was Kingdom Hearts 0.2: A Fragmentary Passage, which I completed multiple times for the Combat Comprehensive. Probably one of my favorite videos this year, just like with how fast I was able to produce it and just like sort of like interacting with a game this short. It's very interesting and different, where a lot of other games, like making a video on it, it just can be kind of a long, drawn out, arduous process. All right, let's start off with something much less hardcore than a JRPG. Now, I went to Universal Studios Hollywood earlier this year and made an entire video dedicated to Super Nintendo World, and it really put me in a big Mario mood. But after going to the park, I realized, wait a minute, there's one 3D Mario game that I've never finished. I've never even played it. And so I sought to rectify that pretty soon after. And that is Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. I'm going to be counting these as two separate games in this video because the styles of both of them are pretty different. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury was released for Nintendo Switch in early 2021, published and developed by Nintendo. Overall, I found both of these games very enjoyable in different ways.
Super Mario 3D World is a game that took me a while to really appreciate. At first, playing through the game's early levels, it felt very generic Mario. But as you go further into the game, explore more of the worlds, the idea and concepts that the game plays around with are really fun and interesting in a way that is totally different from the standard 3D Marios. To me, there's a lot of really interesting and memorable levels. One I think of is like the dash pad levels, where you just have to keep hitting these pads in order to reach the goal. Weirdly, it reminds me of those auto-scrolling stages in 2D Mario games. Yet, these ones in 3D World have their own energy to them, as you really have to be careful with the camera and sort of like your second axis of movement, since you're in 3D, that you don't just like run off a platform and like die. Or I think about that one underground level where there's all these different shadows projected on the wall, and they kind of have to make you think outside the box on how to like obtain the collectible it's showing, or like avoid something, or it's just placed there for a fun gag. There are tons more levels like this that have some inspiration from previous 2D Marios and 3D Marios, but I feel like it turns the idea on its head. My favorite power-up in the entire game is the Double Cherry. It's so unique compared to most other Mario power-ups, where mostly you just put on a soup, maybe you get a projectile, maybe you get something that you can, hit enemies below you. But this one is a bit weird and unwieldy to control when you're first learning it, but it's super fun to utilize multiple Marios at the same time once you get a hang of it. And there really is some interesting aspects to the gameplay of like trying to survive with as many Marios as you can in order to unlock sort of these like side collectibles as you get through the stage. To me, the Double Cherry is the perfect representation of 3D World itself. It's a bit odd compared to other 3D Marios, and there's maybe a little bit of an awkward learning curve, but once you get used to it, it's an incredibly fun time. There's also Bowser's Fury, a much shorter game included with 3D World when it released on Switch. What's really fascinating about Bowser's Fury is that it's an open world style game, but it is very, very short, which really you kind of see the opposite. Open world games tend to be extremely long, heavily packed with content, etc. In fact, this game is so short, I almost beat it on a single charge of my launch Switch 1's battery. Instead of having proper levels that are a few minutes long with some side objectives to get some additional collectibles, Bowser's Fury is an open world map that you kind of slowly have to unlock throughout the course of the game. When you get every single cat shine, you can explore the whole map freely with no issues, but you have to kind of slowly work your way up there. You do have a lot of these like sub-regions of the entire map, and then further from there, you kind of have these little like playground areas with smaller objectives to get a cat shine. The closest analogy I can make is that a lot of the cat shines that you acquire are kind of like the secondary objective stars in Mario 64, but in Bowser's Fury, those cat shines have like dedicated platforming obstacles tied to them rather than just using already existing level assets and then putting an objective in that level. While I do like the addition of Bowser Jr. to this game, having slightly different narrative framing and having another character to bounce off of, in gameplay, I have like almost totally forgot about Bowser Jr. entirely. Really only have to interact with Bowser Jr. on like sparing occasions, and I guess technically he holds all of your power-ups too. But like it's kind of easy to forget that he's there most of the time. I also really like the kaiju-inspired aspects of this game with like the big Bowser. You kind of can use him when he's rampaging to destroy certain areas of levels in order to get access to cat shines and like the one-on-one boss fights that you have with them. Obviously, Bowser is no stranger to like growing to beyond his regular size in Mario games, but like incorporating it into kind of like that platforming separate from the boss fights in order to get closer to objectives is a really cool idea. Bowser's Fury is a super fun, tight, short experience that feels distinct within the Mario canon. Maybe it's a proof of concept to leading up to a game that is much bigger in scope, but in the same format, or maybe it's just a one-off experiment, who knows?
I definitely feel like Nintendo is onto something with Bowser's Fury specifically. Not specifically the game design, but more just like the length, like a smaller version of one of their like franchises that has a much longer game in comparison. I played Kingdom Hearts 0.2 this year, and that felt like a bad way to do like a smaller version of Kingdom Hearts. And so it's so interesting to see Nintendo like do something like this and actually like execute it really well. So upon the completion of both of these games, I can confidently say that I've played almost every single Super Mario 3D platformer in the series, aside from Super Mario 64 DS. And hey, speaking of 3D platformers, we're now gonna jump from Nintendo to PlayStation. And we're gonna jump pretty far back in time. We're gonna jump to Jumping Flash. Jumping Flash was a PlayStation 1 game released in 1995, published by Sony Computer Entertainment. Jumping Flash is particularly notable because it is a 3D platformer a whole year plus before the release of Super Mario 64, which is incredible. So that fact, combined with me kind of slowly crawling through the PlayStation back catalog to sort of like make my gaming knowledge more well-rounded and robust, made me interested in playing it.
You may notice from the gameplay footage here that this is a first-person 3D platformer, and I find this choice to be really incredibly ingenious for the time. Considering how many early 3D games had inherent issues with just figuring out how to get the camera to work and make it feel good, just having a first-person's perspective eliminate all of that is a really clever idea, and it really does change the way that the game is designed and really sets it apart from like almost any other 3D platformer. For most levels, the format is that you need to go and collect these little carrots spread throughout the map, figure out how to platform your way up there, and then collect it, and then you can get to the finished platform to complete the level. The level design is really interestingly integrated due to the fact that the game is first person. That means that since your viewport and your movement are both tied to the D-pad, you really can't just like freely look around trying to find a lot of these collectibles. So the game really kind of forces you to sort of like maneuver around, look around, climb up in order to try to find a lot of these collectibles. And so it encourages a lot of kind of platforming. Get up to this area, not specifically because there's something interesting up there itself, but it's a good vantage point for you to try to find where these other collectibles are in the level. Now, you'd think with a first-person platformer with tank controls that it would be a horrendously bad platforming experience to play as a modern gamer. But I found the game is actually like pretty lenient and forgiving. The actual platforming doesn't require like sort of split-second reaction time. There's moving platforms but they move pretty incredibly slowly, or stuff just kind of stays in place. So really the only thing you have to worry about moving around is enemies. Now, where Jumping Flash shows its weaknesses are in the boss battles. It is the most poorly aged aspect of the game, in my opinion. This game really isn't tuned for quick, precise controls, and while the platforming accommodates for that, the bosses really don't. Really, the quickest thing that you can do is just jump out of the way, and that's it. Any sort of like turning or movement in order to face a boss is going to be obnoxious. If you're interested in checking out Jumping Flash, another upside is that it's extremely short. You can beat the game in like an hour, but it also has some replayability as well, trying to get all of the collectibles outside of the mandatory ones, plus some other aspects to it. So if you're just in the mood for like a quick get in, get out platformer you could play in like a sitting or two, this is the game for it.
Overall, I really do like Jumping Flash quite a fair bit. I think the game has aged pretty badly mechanically in certain areas, but I don't know, this is like a pretty early 3D game for the PS1. Like, I can't entirely blame it, but I do think certain other areas of the game, like sort of the charm and the graphics, have actually aged like surprisingly well, all things considered. I played this game on PlayStation Vita and captured footage off of the PS5 version, and I think the game's art style holds up incredibly well, all things considered. Like, it just looks like pretty good. So last year I played the Shadow of the Colossus remake for PlayStation 4, and I really enjoyed my time with the game quite a lot, and it gave me like a bit of an itch for Team Ico games. And so this year I decided to play another one of their titles, The Last Guardian. You know, it's very weird for somebody of my age to kind of look at Last Guardian as like just another video game now, because like it was so hyped prior to it coming out. Like, it was in that weird period in like the mid 2010s when all of these games that were like kind of gestating in like the early to late 2000s, people really wanted really badly and just were not coming to fruition, were finally like starting to like get announced and people's hopes and dreams were being realized. Stuff like FF7 Remake, Kingdom Hearts 3, Last Guardian. The Last Guardian was a game developed and published by PlayStation, released for the PlayStation 4 in 2016, and it's certainly a video game if I've ever played one.
I really wanted to love The Last Guardian. However, I found that the game has some inherent design flaws that really hold it back for me as being a truly great game in my opinion. The main pain point being Trico, the big bird, dog, cat, animal thing. Your player character of the boy plus Trico forms a sort of duo that you have to wrangle with in order to solve the puzzles. Trico acting as the muscle of the group. Trico is big, can do massive jumps, can help you get up into high places that you normally can't get to as a boy. It's the only character of the two that is able to fight enemies, whereas the boy is the one who can command Trico, crawl along smaller spaces like ledges or holes, and operate any sort of human machinery like switches, levers, mirrors, etc. And pretty much all of the puzzles in this game are designed around this dynamic, that you don't have direct control of this much bigger character that can do more impressive things than the boy. But the problem is that when you give commands to Trico in these puzzle sections of the game, it doesn't always listen. I guess this is realistic, quote unquote, like the way a real animal would behave. But in actual gameplay, this is one of the most nightmarish game mechanics you could possibly implement. This conscious design decision made by the development team can be mistaken for a glitch, which it logically would be in almost any other video game, and be recognized as such by like anybody who has played almost any other video game in their entire lives. And as a result, it ends up breaking whatever sort of immersion that the developers were trying to intend to create with this stupid mechanic in the first place. That instead of, having this relationship with the animal Trico and being like, oh, look at this animal and look at these two having some like wholesome fun together and building their relationship and stuff, you're just kind of sitting there and like, wait a minute, why is Trico not doing what I want? And even if you are aware of this mechanic, your start version is still being broken in a sense, that you're not necessarily thinking entirely about the relationship between the boy and Trico. And you're more just thinking, well, I just gotta wait for Trico to do the thing that I actually want him to do. I do think that you could convey some of these same ideas of like a wild animal not listening if these moments were more like scripted beats that were more obviously telegraphed to the player, rather than this sort of weird not listening system that are hidden behind some opaque AI mechanics. I will say though, the puzzles of this game are great. I really enjoyed going through and exploring these environments and sort of like seeing all of the different areas and, the design of this like gigantic valley and progressing up to the top. I also really want to like the visual style in this game, but it doesn't do it for me. There's just technical stuff in the way that just kind of ruins the art. I do like the idea of kind of like this mix of like realism with these more kind of simple graphics, but whatever the PS5 is doing to it just makes it look entirely muddy. Anything remotely white or brightly colored all just kind of blends together in a way that is hard to read, and there's really like no interesting detail going on. It just doesn't look very good to appreciate.
I don't think that's necessarily as interesting or clever as Shadow of the Colossus, and I think some of the design decisions that are made were maybe kind of inherently flawed from the get-go, and maybe like this game wasn't a good idea to start with. But in certain ways, I do like appreciate Team Ico for trying to like innovate and advance sort of the design space that they had set up with Ico and Shadow of the Colossus previously in order to create this new experience. Alright, on the topic of PS4 exclusives, this one you've probably never heard of. It's Shadow of the Beast PlayStation 4. Now, I don't entirely blame you for being like, huh? What? I've never heard of this game. This is like a extremely obscure game in the PlayStation exclusive catalog. I only know this game because My Life in Gaming like talked about it in one of their like gaming recap videos a while ago. I thought it looked interesting and I decided to play it, and I don't know if I should have.
Shadow of the Beast is a 2D platform with some action elements baked in. You have a ton of ways to interact with enemies for a game that's not a 2D fighting game. Punches, grabs, combo kills, supers, blocks, and rolls. You get a big sci-fi gun in one level. I did play on a lower level difficulty, but I never felt like there was anything more interesting possibly going on if I cranked the difficulty up further. I do think that there is a kind of flow that you could reach if you got way better, but even in the best case scenario, the game systems never really felt particularly good to interact with. Everything felt kind of like weird and stiff and awkward in a way that didn't make it particularly enjoyable. Also, this game is not very interesting as a platformer, and it's the worst element of the gameplay. The way your player character moves and jumps doesn't feel particularly good, and the actual platforming itself just feels very uninteresting and very repetitive. There is sort of like a dungeon aspect of Shadow of the Beast that you are kind of going into these areas to activate things and then backtracking and things like that, but I don't know, it's not particularly engaging or interesting, to be honest. One positive thing I will say about Shadow of the Beast is that the art direction is very inspired. This game has some beautiful visuals that create this very alien-feeling landscape that feels like it just goes on forever. I also feel like the creature designs are pretty decent, and I will admit the cutscenes are pretty well animated and directed as well. However, the big problem with the visuals, in my opinion, is the fact that this game has aliasing artifacts everywhere, or whatever all of this like jagged stair-stepping is. It is generally one of the grossest looking video games I have laid my own two eyes on, and it does such a massive disservice to the underlying art direction. The absolute worst case of this is the first level, where every single blade of grass has some of the worst stair-stepping I have ever seen in my life. And it doesn't matter if you're standing still or if you're walking, it just looks so ridiculously terrible. If this wasn't there, the first level would actually be really visually beautiful and impressive, but looking at it on my TV, it was genuinely ugly.
Shadow of the Beast is by far the worst game that I played this year. I generally try not to go out of my way to play bad games for the sake of them being bad, but it was something I was interested in, but ultimately, like, playing it, I don't know if it didn't click for me, or if it's just, like, genuinely that bad, but there's just something kind of fundamentally wrong with this game, and it's not particularly appealing. I don't know, this game doesn't feel particularly memorable to me. There's nothing really interesting about it that really kind of makes it particularly unique or special, or even like moderately good. It's just kind of bland and The most interesting thing about it is like the art style, but that's it. Okay, so I am out of interesting transitions from game to game, so I'm just gonna talk about RoboCop Rogue City here. So the reason I decided to play Rogue City is because, like, it's kind of like a little bit of a cult hit. Like, it's not the most popular game in the world or anything, but I've heard good things about it. I decided to try it out for myself. And it's an interesting Unreal Engine 5 showcase, but what really appealed to me specifically was the fact that it's like a single-player first-person shooter. I'm not really into like the multiplayer stuff as much, so like, seeing a single-player first-person shooter that kind of appealed more to my sensibilities got me to try it. RoboCop Rogue City is a game published by Nacon, developed by Teon, released for Xbox Series, PS5, and PC.
Rogue City is a very bizarre video game because on one hand, it's a game that feels very futuristic in its use of Unreal Engine 5. Some of the screenshots of the environment in this game look almost photorealistic if you can catch the light right. But simultaneously, it feels like an Xbox 360 game from 2007, and I feel like that is kind of the game's entire charm. That sort of double-A experimental quality that I really don't see as much anymore. Rogue City is a part of what's called the immersive sim genre of video games, which is the genre of what the Deus Ex games are. They're less focused on first-person combat, but more sort of your role-playing in a world that you make all these specific choices that impact the way that all of these different characters interact with you. One big example of this is this subplot of like the political maneuvering going on in the background, and your alignment with one of two mayoral candidates is a big part of the game's story. And so it really asks you to engage with one of these two mayoral candidates, kind of according to the way that you see RoboCop as a character. Now, I'm not a fan of RoboCop at all in any aspect, but I found the story to be decent at least. It was at least good enough to carry the world interactions, had some interesting side quests, some funny and interesting exchanges. There definitely are some interesting ideas and themes posed by the game about what makes us human. And I thought it was really interesting. Maybe I was reading a little too deep into this, but I thought there was an interesting sort of line being drawn with like kind of comparing RoboCop and sort of his struggle with feeling human compared to a lot of the human antagonists in the game and sort of their feeling of not being human because they're kind of working for this larger system that kind of wants to grind everything under it. So these flesh and blood humans, like, yeah, they might be human in a physical sense, but are they human in sort of like that passion, that sense, like that sense of like wanting to help others and make the world a better place? It kind of asks us to compare and contrast that with Alex Murphy. Now, as for the gunplay, to be honest, I'm not a big FPS guy, so don't take my word as entirely gospel, but I think the combat's fine. You do have your default pistol you can upgrade, and you do have a wide variety of different guns that you can pick up from various enemies that you kill. From machine guns to long guns to other pistols, this is really where the combat variety comes from. And as you go through the game, the enemies keep dropping new, interesting weapons for you to mess with. The game throws just enough new types of weapons and upgrades at you at a steady enough pace to keep the combat from not getting entirely stale. And the game is structured in such a way that the immersive sim aspects are going to be breaking up the combat enough that you're not going to get entirely exhaustive of the combat, even though the combat might be a little bit more shallow than your average first-person shooter. I also really like the way that RoboCop plays in this game. He's this very powerful yet slow-moving tank that can just take a lot of damage. The simple gunplay plus the sort of playstyle of RoboCop on paper would make the combat sound really boring, but it just kind of works. The simple efficiency of just headshotting guys and kind of tanking bullets as you go through waves and waves of enemy just kind of has this like cathartic nature to it. You do get to fulfill that ultimate RoboCop power fantasy early on in the game, but as the game progresses, you do run into heavier equipment and more deadly enemies that does make RoboCop feel less tanky by comparison, and obviously increase the difficulty as you go throughout the game.
Overall, I would really recommend Rogue City. I don't think that it's necessarily the best in any one particular aspect, that it's really like competing toe-to-toe with like the best of the best video games or anything like that. But I feel like the package itself is pretty solid and has a particular appeal that really not a lot of other games have. And so if you're interested in the immersive sim genre, maybe you don't really play immersive sims and you want to try to jump in, or maybe even you're just a huge fan of RoboCop, I would highly recommend that you play this game. Now, the next thing that you might be expecting me to say is talking about the Unfinished Business DLC, which did come out in 2025, but I didn't get around to playing it. I haven't even bought the DLC yet. I just got distracted with other games, but I am going to actively try to rectify that and jump back into the world of old Detroit and RoboCop come next year. And finally, the last two games that I played this year, literally squeezing in like the first 2 weeks of December, I played Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2 back-to-back. Now, if you're watching my channel in 2024, you know that I got a PlayStation 5, and it came with Spider-Man 2 as part of the bundle deal. But I kind of kept putting off playing Spider-Man 2 because I didn't play Miles Morales. I wanted the physical disc really bad, but I felt like the price was too high. So once I saw it on sale for like a Black Friday deal, I snagged it and I just kind of like blew through both games. Both Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2 were developed by Insomniac Games, published by PlayStation for PlayStation 5 in 2020 and 2023 respectively.
I want to talk about Miles Morales first. Now, while from one perspective, you could just see Miles Morales as just a supercharged DLC for Spider-Man PS4, I view it in a very different way. I do think that this game does effectively weave together sort of like Miles' origin arc having to deal with bad guys on his own, with some interesting gameplay additions that lay the foundation for Spider-Man 2 going forward, and does it in such a way that leaves me pretty satisfied with it, unlike the original Spider-Man PS4 DLCs, which I was not a particularly big fan of, to be honest. I think the story choice of having this game set in winter with tons and tons of snow across New York City is one of the most brilliant creative choices that the developers could have possibly made. It not only sufficiently distinguishes itself from Spider-Man PS4 by being set in a different season, it also creates a very different sort of like atmosphere and tone for the story. Combined with a lot of this game taking place at night, it creates a sign of simultaneous beauty and somberness that I think perfectly fits the sort of like undertones and themes that this game is trying to hit at. Miles' character arc in his game is him growing into the Spider-Man role, just dealing with enemies and sort of like defining his own moral values and what it means to be Spider-Man. But simultaneously, there is this thing that happened to him in the first game that he's recovering from, and you can feel this very specific void in his life kind of going through the story of this game. And so this sort of like kind of juxtaposed beauty of kind of like discovering who you are and sort of, you know, what you're able to do, yet kind of mourning, you know, loss and sort of dealing with that pain, I think is perfectly represented by the visuals. Now, as for the story, the element that I thought was the coolest was seeing Miles become Spider-Man, learning to deal with a lot of the problems that Spider-Man has. He's learning and developing his powers, etc. However, the overarching conflict with the villains, I really wasn't into as much. The runtime of this game is extremely short, so I get that the writers can't flesh out the characters as much as the other main Spider-Man games, but I felt like the overarching conflict, especially with the villains, felt pretty weak to me. It didn't feel like there was a particular like theme or idea that the story was trying to tackle. Like, it just kind of felt like Miles' origin story, and here's the bad guys that he has to fight. Like, there's really no sort of like overarching theme relating to the story of the villains. All of the themes really felt like it came from Miles' side of growing as Spider-Man. The only new character that felt particularly interesting to me was Aaron Davis. If his arc was put into a much longer games, then I think he could have been really, really compelling. But just the shorter runtime and the other stuff going on in the game made his role feel very cliche and shallow. Now, as for combat, I thought the introduction of Miles' electricity powers was a cool way to evolve the gameplay and distinguish him from Peter Parker Spider-Man. It also had some cool narrative cross-gameplay integration as well. When Miles gets more confident as Spider-Man, his powers develop more as well. And so it takes everything that the player is doing in gameplay and kind of carries that over into Miles. And as a result, kind of makes me feel more emotionally invested in the journey as a result. All right, now let's talk about Spider-Man 2. It's obviously more Spider-Man, but it is evolved significantly, even compared to Miles Morales. The game has far more interesting traversal, a bigger world, more stuff to do, standard open world sequel stuff. But what I really love about Spider-Man 2 is the combat gameplay. They really stepped it up a ton from 1 and Miles, and man, I was hooked playing this game once I realized the direction it was going in. Obviously, this game has that Batman Arkham Asylum foundation that Spider-Man PS4 was built on top of. You have your large combo chains, large mob battles, meters that can give you takedown finishers, various gadgets that you can use. You also have the Spider-Man powers on top of that, using webs to stun enemies, draw them towards you, launch them into the air, etc. In addition to all that, Spider-Man 2 layers on this additional system of giving you rechargeable quick abilities that you can use mapped to L1 plus specific face button. Also, using the L1 button allows you to access a parry that can counter incoming attacks and can recharge a bit of those abilities if you can successfully parry. And so what these two additions do is that it transforms Spider-Man 2's combat into something closer to like the Final Fantasy VII Remake games, weirdly enough, where your basic attacks are really only there to feed into the abilities and various other meters that you have to do larger amounts of damage. Tapping this design direction is brilliant in my opinion, as it allows the game to have truly great one-on-one boss fights, as these abilities work really well not just in mob fights, but also against singular bosses, as I know a lot of Batman Arkham derivatives kind of have trouble with having good boss fights.
Okay, this is the most that I've gushed about gameplay in like this entire video, so what about the Spider-Man 2 story? I liked it! Considering the discourse around Spider-Man 2, you think the story is like a 4 out of 10. Like, just like straight up, somebody who doesn't know how to write, horrendous storytelling, every single possible wrong writing choice that could have been made. Now, I definitely won't say that it's obviously anywhere near as good as Spider-Man PS4, but I still liked quite a lot of stuff in the story. To be honest, I feel kind of so passionately about the story, and I feel like I have like kind of a lot to say that I might even do like a dedicated like story spoiler video for Spider-Man 2. Like, I have some interesting stuff I feel like I want to say on it.
I have sand everywhere.
So if you were to ask me to compare all of the games I have beaten this year from best to worst, not counting FF7 Rebirth because I played that last year, it would probably go Mario 3D World, Bowser's Fury, Spider-Man 2, RoboCop Rogue City, The Last Guardian, Jumping Flash, Miles Morales, Kingdom Hearts 0.2, and then way down below at bottom place, Shadow of the Beast PS4. So what's next for me in gaming in 2026? To be honest, I really have no idea. As for new releases I'm really excited for, the Insomniac Wolverine game coming to PS5 obviously entices me, considering I just came off of both of the Spider-Man games I just played. Control Resonant looks super interesting to me ever since I saw it at the Game Awards 2025. I'm really glad that we're like starting to see a little bit more competition in like sort of like character action-ish kind of space. Lost Soul Aside came out this year. I know that this sounds like a cliche answer, but Grand Theft Auto 6 looks really, really interesting. It's obviously the elephant in the room going into 2026, if it even does come out that year. I'm particularly interested in playing GTA 6 because, surprise, surprise, I've never played a Grand Theft Auto game. I've been playing video games for 20 years and I've never touched a Grand Theft Auto game in my entire life. So anyways, guys, that's it through the video. What did you think about gaming in 2025? What games have you personally played? Comment down below. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Leave a like. Hit up my Patreon down in the description. Give me some of that cash money if you want to see my videos get a little bit better. Maybe help me buy some video games for some projects I want to work on. Anyways, guys, that's it. And have a good day.